What about, I mean, obviously the government has now agreed to start some talks with the United Arab Emirates, and you've got the Gulf Cooperation Council, which was on your agenda. I mean, is that likely to be the next deal that's done? I mean, a lot of the rhetoric from the coalition government and the National Party when it was in opposition was as though Labor did nothing on trade.
Oh, happy to stand on our performance. 7 trade agreements, 3 upgrades, 4 new trade agreements, CPTPP, RCEP, EU, UK trade agreements. They were new. And then we upgraded the China Free Trade Agreement, ANZFTA as well. We did pretty well, given that we were operating and actually negotiating in COVID times, and a lot of it was in a new format, which was on Zoom or electronically, and many officials across the world thought that was not possible. We did it. We proved that we could.
Well, and I remember talking to you on a number of occasions when you were sort of basically in prison and sort of isolation, having come back from a trade trip.
Yeah, I did 3 stints in quarantine, and it was necessary. There were some weird times, and not just for us, and some uncertainty about whether you could meet with officials offshore. So we had to do what we could, and I think as I say, our record stands for itself. We're always supportive and aspirational about any trade agreements, and we support the government. But there was a lot of rhetoric and some promises made across the whole board, of course, but in terms of trade, FTA with India within 3 years was never going to be achieved. It's not that we don't support growing that relationship as we were, and anything that can be done to grow that is positive. But a free trade agreement is something that is about as kind of allergic to them as it is to the US at this point.
I mean, given I think it's roughly now, I think about 73% of our exports are covered by free trade agreements. Ought our focus be more on trying to leverage off the existing deals rather than being too worried about signing new ones?
Well, absolutely. We have to focus on non-tariff barriers. So there's still some tariffs in place. There are still some phytosanitary conditions that we find are difficult, but there are plenty of opportunities for a small country in a very, very big world through some trade agreements that we have. And even in the US, where we don't have a formal FTA, we have some very healthy commercial arrangements. So the opportunities are there. Of course, a lot of exporters and a lot of the sectors want to take the easiest path. That path often does include a FTA where there's certainty when you're trading goods or services or capital or people. But even without FTAs, there are opportunities for New Zealanders to sell their goods and services all around the world.
So what about, I mean, obviously the government has now agreed to start some talks with the United Arab Emirates, and you've got the Gulf Cooperation Council, which was on your agenda. I mean, is that likely to be the next deal that's done?
Look, 2009, we'd made some good progress. There'd been quite a lead up, and the national government at the time, was wanting to sign with GCC, but internal politics there prevented that happening. So when they came back to us in government, the deal they put on the table was nowhere near what had been negotiated. So the goods offer was significantly less. We nonetheless engaged with them with a view to trying to secure that with the 7 parties. At the same time, of course, there's some internal competition within the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabia in terms of who would like to be the centre or the hub for commercial development, and actually not just for the Middle East, but actually for the wider world. That competition has meant that UAE is stepping up and saying we'll have a trade agreement, a bilateral with any country that wants to. So they made that offer to us. We thought about it, keeping in mind the need to keep the door open for the GCC. The bigger, the bigger pot would be across all those Arab states. Nonetheless, it is good that the Minister and the government have now indicated an intention to progress with the UAE, as long as they make sure that they don't offend GCC members at the same time, because that's where we'd like to move to next.
I mean, you mentioned India earlier. So do you see any prospect of building a relationship that at some point, not in the next 3 years, but at some point then trade negotiations could start with India?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I think there's some good partnerships that have evolved. There was some in dairy, building those in kiwi fruit and apples, and services. Raycon and that has been providing chips and technology for the Indian space race, if you like. And so there's some very good partnerships and arrangements in place now. We can build on those. It's a very big population. It's a growing economy. But the free trade agreement, just like the US, is somewhat of a poison chalice, they think, for any government in place. We don't know what the outcome of the recent election in India might do for trade. We hope it might make it easier, but I suspect possibly not. Partnerships, on the other hand, where there's benefit to both parties in terms of commercial arrangements between companies, I think they're still very possible, and I think they're still happening.
I mean, the Prime Minister seems quite impatient to get some things done. Do you think he's realistic about how long it can take to get trade deals through?
Look, I don't mind aspiration, but you need a touch of realism. Politics is the art of the possible, and you have to deal with other parties at the other end. It's a big democracy in terms of India, and, farmers in particular, people in the rural areas, they're running little 3 or 4 cow dairy farms, very sensitive to price, very small volumes of milk, paranoid about New Zealand as the biggest exporter of milk products in the world coming in and dumping in the market. Plenty of anecdotes when you go to India about what has happened in the past. We have to reassure them that we can, in terms of dairy, build partnerships to allow them to get better value from their own milk. They have the biggest dairy industry in the world. We have very smart technology. We can assist them. As the value of the milk that they produce increases, so too does the demand across the globe. We're about 2 to 3% of total global production. We fill the gaps where needed. We can fill the gaps for India as well, while supporting their rural economy to increase their standard of living.
I mean, the Prime Minister is aiming or intending to lead a trade delegation there by the end of the year. What approach should they take?
Look, I think it's building the relationships with different companies, and those companies will be big and small, but they'll all have connections back into the political system, just to reassure the local politicians, and there are many across that very populous country, the local politicians that actually having a partnership with New Zealand is of huge value. Increasing it into a formal trade arrangement might even add more for them as well as it does for us. That's the argument that we have to put forward, but just dumping on the table an FTA is unlikely to get us the progress that we need over time.
For all of July, we're offering an annual subscription to MBR for just $399. Don't miss out on this special offer.